Well, welcome everyone to our OECD Central, Eastern and Southeastern Policy Dialogue. Today we have a very exciting and important subject that's also very up to date. So we're going to talk about labor migration and what that means for regional integration, for sending and receiving countries. We will build that on a report that my colleagues Anita Richter and Lisa Andersen did about the Western Balkans, but we are going to look much further then and have experts, scientists, and also policymakers from countries as diverse as Poland. Paweł Kaczmarczyk from the University of Warsaw is here. Ivan Brgljac from Point of Return from Serbia is also here to discuss with us, and Rainis Lasmanis from the Society Integration Fund in Latvia. In principle, we're also waiting for David Aduns from the Institute for Labor Studies in Germany, but well, he might still come. But first of all, Andreas Schaal, who is our Sherpa, OECD Sherpa, and also the Director of Global Relations, and who is responsible for the work we're going to present, is going to say a few words in terms of introduction. So Andreas, you have the floor.
Thanks so much, Nicola. Dear Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, friends, colleagues, real pleasure to be with you today to open this OECD policy webinar on migration and regional integration in Central, Eastern and Southeast Europe. I want to thank everybody who is with us today, because I think this is a passionate topic and an important conversation, because labor migration from the region, from Central and Southeast Europe, has been substantial for decades now. It has created, and many of our countries benefited from it. It has created a large diaspora, rising incomes, skill shortages. Some countries in the region have started to experience immigration themselves, including return migration. But this is a process which needs to be well managed in order to have good and proper integration. Many countries in the region are trying to find better ways to seize the opportunities that their diasporas can offer. And this is basically the major story in the report we have prepared and which we are discussing today. We witnessed these trends in our report, labor migration in the Western Balkans, mapping patterns, addressing challenges, reaping the benefits, which is, as said, the backbone of our seminar today. Let me just present you a few, what we call it, the killer facts to illustrate what we are talking about. For the Western Balkans, immigration continues to be a fact of life. We show, for example, that about 1 out of 5 of the region's citizens already lived abroad. 1 out of 3 citizens currently living in the Western Balkans economy said that they are considering leaving, which is also an important message to consider for policies to stop the brain drain and to stop or to kind of revert this trend to a certain extent. Third, such high immigration levels have significant socioeconomic ramifications. They are already affecting each Western Balkan economy, intensifying considerable skill shortages and mismatches. In turn, they undermine present and future competitiveness. So this is really a field of economic policies which needs to be tackled. Of course, over 40% of Western Balkan employers say that they are unable to fill vacancies due to applicants' lack of skills. And more than 1/3 of the region's employers say that immigration is a reason for unfilled vacancies. So one of the major messages of our work and of our report is we need to do both, invest in skills of the people in the countries in Western Balkans, but also invest in the upskilling of the people in the diaspora. So recognizing these trends and developments, we have focused our last year's high-level regional conference on Southeast Europe on these skill shortages and on the necessary talent transformation for domestic labor markets. In this conference, we had a conversation with ministers from the region and their counterparts from OECD countries to discuss how countries in the Western Balkans can better manage this form of migration and can also offer better prospects for their citizens and businesses. And this is a conversation we want to deepen with this webinar. We aim to build on the policy debate, expand to Central, Eastern and Southeastern Europe to explore which policies where we can learn from each other, which policies can foster successful integration in destination countries while keeping the options open for successful return migration. We are very keen not only to tell you what we found out, but to further listen to your examples of cooperation with migrant communities, foster knowledge and investment flows, as well as stronger business ties. Together, we can bring here the public sector, the business community, the civil society, and we really believe, and I'm very glad that Nicola Brand is at the forefront of these efforts, together with the team here in Paris, Marcina Kislewska, Anita Richter, to convene this regional policy dialogue on a common challenge across the region. And in this webinar, we want to share our knowledge, but also, as I said, listen and discuss with you how to respond best to the economic constraints for the benefit of countries in the region and beyond. With this in mind, I wish you all a very interesting 1.5 hours today. And we hope that our conversations today can hopefully also inspire future policy action, and very much look forward. Count on the OECD to be a partner for you in this. Very, very happy to kind of spearhead this important exercise. Thank you very much indeed, and wish you a really inspiring conversations.
Thank you very much, Andreas, for bringing us into the right spirit. And I think without further ado, we're going to give the floor and also the screen to Anita and Lisa, who are going to introduce us in the study that's going to be a bit the data and fact basis for what we discuss later on a broader scope.
Thank you so much, Nicola. Thank you, Andreas, for setting already the context and the spirit, as Nicola just nicely said. We actually have a PowerPoint presentation. Perhaps the colleagues can pull it up now. That's a good moment to show the few slides. Andreas already presented, let's say, the key messages from the report, and I'm just gonna have, together with Lisa, we're gonna dive in a few more facts and policy recommendations from our report, and we hope to sort of set the scene a little bit for the further on discussion. So basically, in our report, we have our report provides some key insights into the labor migration trends and patterns of the 6 Western Balkan economies. It sheds light on the root causes of immigration, and it also explores some policy approaches that gear towards maximizing the benefits for the region for migration, while also mitigating its negative consequences. We already can go to the next slide. Yeah, and this one, perfectly. So looking at the migration patterns, this is the first entry point that we have been looking at. And the figure on the top shows that the number of migrants worldwide from the Western Balkan 6 economies have doubled over the last 3 decades, from about 2.3 million in 1990 to 4.8 in 2020. What else? And this means actually today that about 20% of the population born in the Western Balkans live outside of the region. And the share of the intra-regional migration, which is depicted by the red square on the slide, has remained relatively stable since 1995, at about 15% of the total immigration in the Western Balkans. In the middle figure, we analyzed the main destinations of the Western Balkan migrants, and we can actually see here that most of them live only in a handful of OECD countries, primarily in Germany, Italy, Greece, Austria, Switzerland, and the United States. And immigration to the Central and Eastern European countries has notably gained traction. Before the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, it has even tripled within only 4 years between 2015 and 19. And this large increase was actually mainly driven by migration from Bosnia-Herzegovina, Serbia, and Kosovo to Croatia and Slovenia. The bottom figure shows that migration to the European Economic Area and Switzerland has also significantly increased between 2011 and 2019. And in fact, it was with the COVID pandemic, it has stopped for a short period. It has decreased in 2020 about 1/3, but it was just a temporary effect, and the immigration continues to rise again. So going to the next slide, here we are of course asking also as ourselves, what is driving immigration from the Balkans to the OECD countries? And for this purpose, we've conducted an online survey of Western Balkan immigrants between July 2021 and January 2022 to better understand the reasons and the incentives of immigration, but also of return migration. And these results are consistent also with previous surveys that have been put in place. And in fact, they show a mix of social, economic, and political push and pull factors that drive immigration from the Balkans. So on this figure, in fact, you see the blue bars, and they show the top 3 reasons that respondents provided. What is extremely important for them to actually decide to leave the country. And the number 1 respondents was a high level of corruption and political instability in their home economy, but also better employment opportunities they associated with living abroad. And also the third one, the wish to improve the living standards. But there are also a number of additional factors that incentivize immigration that include comparatively low wages, weak education outcomes, and low social security. Moreover, what is important to note is that diaspora networks play an important role. Continued labor demand and migration policy schemes in destination countries that target specifically Western Balkan labor migrants have then further lowered the barriers for people to enter in the destination countries. We know about the specific schemes, for example, that have been put in place by Germany in 2016. And what does it mean? So continued high levels of immigration, specifically of young talents, pose, not surprisingly, severe development challenges for the region, because they accentuate the noticeable skills shortages and also mismatches now we see in the region, which has longer term implications because it reduces the growth and productivity potential of local companies. And also it can prevent potential investors from finding the adequate skills on the ground. But there's also another side to the story. Going to the next slide is the role of remittances. So the large diaspora plays an important role for the region already, because remittances represent a key income source for many households in the region in the country of origin. With an average of 10% of GDP, remittances inflows to the region are very substantial for the Western Balkans. And in the case of Kosovo, remittances are even close to 18% of GDP. So remittances have a potential to reduce poverty, to spur economic development through household investments in the countries of origin. However, in the case of the Balkans, the full potential of those remittances to support long-term development through productive investments is not yet realized. And we identified a few barriers for for these productive remittance investments. First of all, remittances are often sent through informal channels, which potentially prevents the remittances from entering the formal financial system. So one reason for using remittances channels is the costs for sending them, because there are currently well above the 3% threshold that was set by the Sustainable Development Goals. So it's very, very expensive to do so. And a second important factor is low trust and also low access to financial institutions and banks. What makes people decide to use alternative channels for sending remittances. And this again makes it more difficult to use it more for productive investments. Just underpinned by figures, about 1/4 of men and 1/3 of women in the Western Balkans do not have access to a bank account. And with this, we're going to the next slide, and I'm handing over to Lisa, who will continue with the presentation.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. Yes, so in another part of the report, we were also looking at specifically at the labor or the labor market outcomes of immigrants from the Western Balkan in OECD countries. We're here, as you can see, comparing trends from 2010 and 2015. So obviously these are not the most up-to-date numbers. A lot has happened since 2015 also, with the pandemic and recent economic developments, etc. So this, at the time of drafting the report, this was the latest data that we had access to from our own database. We are currently updating this, so hopefully in the future we'll be also able to update these numbers. We will come out with a new round of this data early next year probably, and we're also actually hoping to expand the scope a bit of this data. For now we have covered all OECD countries, immigrants in all OECD countries, but we're hoping in the future and already for this next round that we can also cover some of non-OECD member countries. So that would also include the Western Balkan economies, and it would be really interesting to also be able to analyze outcomes of immigrants in the Western Balkan economies in themselves. But that is for the future. What we had to work with here was the developments that we see over 2010 to 15. And in the top figure here, you see the labor market outcomes in terms of employment and labor force participation. And we see for all Western Balkan economies a positive trend between 2010 and 2015. So meaning that there are more immigrants in OECD countries that are employed and more that are also active, so actively taking part of the labor force. However, the participation rates and the employment rates are still lower than if we look at the average immigrant population in the OECD. So, for example, less than 60% of immigrants from Albania, Kosovo, and North Macedonia are employed, compared to 67% of the average foreign-born population in the OECD. So this is obviously quite low. We have also analyzed a bit in which sectors and occupations that immigrants are working, and we see a trend towards men working in the construction sector and women more in occupations such as cleaners and helpers, and also service occupations. And in the lower part of the figure here, we also looked at the skill level of the immigrants in OECD countries. And we see that the trend is really that a majority are mid-skilled. Often in the policy debates, both in origin countries and destination countries, we hear about highly skilled. So people leaving are the problems, the issues of brain drain, and that it's an issue. But the large majority here, the majority are mid-skilled, which is natural also, since that's also a big part of the population in the Western Balkan economies have an education equivalent to mid-skilled occupations. We do see some variation across the economies also, with some more highly skilled immigration from some of the countries, but it's also looking at the foreign-born population on average, it's really the biggest share of the immigrants are mid-skilled. Something when looking at particularly at the highly skilled, or those with tertiary education of the migrant population from the Western Balkans, we see that overqualification is an issue. There is close to half of the migrants from the Western Balkans with tertiary education do not work in an occupation that matches their skill level or their education level. And this is to compare with the average immigrant population in the OECD, where we see an overqualification rate of about 1/3. So quite a lot higher. Serbia, for example, is more close to the OECD average here, meaning that it's about 1/3 of the highly educated migrants that are overqualified. But for some of the other economies, Western Balkan economies, migrants are really struggling. Highly skilled migrants are really struggling with finding a job that matches their education level. We can take the next slide. So this all brings us, it looks very blank right now, but we do have some policy recommendations also. Maybe it needs another click. Or, yes, so we came to the conclusion that in order to address some of these challenges and harness better the development potential of migration in the Western Balkan region, there are 3 courses of actions to take here. I think we can go down on the slide and show the 3. Yeah. So the first one is about strengthening the management of labor migration flows and improve the outcomes of labor migrants in destination countries. So this is linked to what I said in the last slide also about, for example, overqualification and also low employment rates that to make the most out of migration. We need to improve labor market outcomes and labor market integration of migrants and make sure that migrants can find jobs that matches their skill level. The other part we can, I think there are some points there. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's easier. Doing this would require to reinforce migration management by improving institutional coordination and boosting migration data collection. So we see that in most Western Balkan economies, we have there are efforts to improve institutional coordination. Most economies have created bodies to coordinate the work, but there could be more. There's more to be done in this area, and also quite some lack of data as well. And maybe that's something that we'll come back to in the discussions, in the panel discussion after, because this is really not a problem that is unique for this region, but in many countries, there is lack of data on return migration, but also in terms of current immigrants, what they're doing, etc. So more data in this area would also help strengthen labor migration policies. Also more support to, as I say, employment outcomes. So this is obviously not something that just from the perspective of sending countries, it's difficult to affect what is happening in the countries of destination in terms of labor market integration. We discuss a little bit things to do to prepare migrants before leaving, but this is also obviously something where we need collaboration between countries of destination and origin. The second course of action that we're discussing is to maximize the development benefits from immigration. One very important aspect here is to build trust and strengthen the engagement with the diaspora. And here, as particularly in the Western Balkan context, we see a lot of scope to build on the very active diaspora associations that already exist and that have the networks, that have also knowledge. We were observing that many active diaspora organizations themselves collect data to some extent, regularly conduct surveys, and are very up to date on their diaspora the interest of the diaspora and the needs of the diaspora. So, and many times there was also a call to have more engagement from the government. So what we see on the ground already happening in terms of policy is largely driven by these organizations. Also something that we will come back to in the panel discussion after the presentation. Also make the most out of diaspora skills and financial resources by encouraging the diaspora to invest in the origin countries, both in terms of financial investments, but also benefit from the knowledge that exists within the diaspora through different ways of transferring this knowledge and attracting diaspora investments more strategically. And in parallel with this, also facilitate for those who want to return and reintegrate. We know that it's not feasible to think that everyone is going to return, but to actively work with those two tracks in parallel to both have a closer connection with the diaspora and create opportunities for investments and knowledge exchange, at the same time as also encouraging those that are interested in returning to facilitate that process as well. And that we saw a little bit of initiatives in this in this area for return and reintegration. We will hear more about it in the panel, but we also saw scope for much more of active engagement, especially from the government and on this side. And we also tried to discuss a bit what could be interesting examples from other countries or in the region and beyond about this. And one of the things that came up and a lot is to have one place to go to for the one platform, preferably an electronic platform for the diaspora and potential return migrants to refer to, where you can and make that very interactive as well, not just put up information that is not relevant in a year or two later, but really have something where diaspora can connect among themselves, but also connect to relevant institutions, businesses, etc., in the country of origin. We had a few examples from Croatia, for example, that has been trying to put this in place. I think it's also very interesting to look at other OECD countries, for example, since this is also an issue in OECD countries. There is, for example, Lithuania that comes up regularly as a good example here, and having done a lot of active reach out to potential return migrants, but now also working, combining that with reaching out to non-nationals to also be able to attract interesting immigrant labor force. So, and in the same way, both targeting its own population through return migration, but also additional immigration. And in the panel that is coming up, we will obviously also hear more from the Baltic region. I'm looking forward to that, to hear about active policies in this area. And finally, we do also acknowledge that along these lines, we also need to look at the push factors for immigration, what is driving people out of the region. And in many cases, this is linked to conditions for living, working, and investing. So there are reforms that needs to be put in place here to prevent that people feel that pushed out or that they have to leave. But we will continue to see people leaving, but make this more of a choice rather than a necessity to leave. One of the things that we particularly discuss is the transition from education to the labor market for youth. That was something that came out a lot in the interviews that we had for this report, that there is a clear gap between the education sector and the labor market demands, etc. So improve matching and make sure that young people can find relevant employment in the countries of origin. So I will stop there. Thank you very much for attention, and we very much look forward to the panel discussions.
Thank you very much, Lisa and Anita. And I just want to encourage the audience. I mean, we used the chat to chase down David, whom we found, but it's really meant for your discussion and entering your questions. And we will integrate those into the discussion. So feel free to use it. And before, I think we can take down the slides now, right? Before I move on to other regions, I think I would like to stay in the Western Balkans. Pavel has already raised his hands, but you'll have to wait a moment, Pavel. Ivan, and refer to Ivan, or basically pose a question to Ivan. What I would like to know, so you're basically engaged in facilitating return. Right, but we also heard how important it is to have good integration policies in the country where people go to, right? But from your perspective, is good integration in destination countries key in order to levy the benefits of migration for Serbia, for the Western Balkans, for those countries who are sending people? Is this good, or does it hinder your work because people will be less inclined to come back? I would like to hear your perspective on that.
Well, I think it's a very complex question, but I think we have a glimpse of an answer in that regard. I think so. Our organization is a returning point. We are the ones who are helping facilitate repatriation. But for us, the way we try to frame this issue is that repatriation is not necessarily just physical relocation back to the country. We live in a modern time where migration is something that is an ongoing thing at maybe even heightened pace. For us, repatriation is anybody who's, as you said, let's say, well-established in the destination country, prosperous, successful, whether it's a university professor, whether it's a businessman or woman, people who decide to then reconnect to the country, help out, create those bridges. Those are people who, in our mind, are also people who are repatriating. So in that regard, to answer your question, I think it's best if people do get accepted in destination country, really find their footing, but keep a connection with the country, the sending country, because that can only multiply the beneficial effects, both of the people who stayed in the country and for future generations of those who are descendants of, let's say, Serbians in Germany, Serbians in Austria, where the majority of the people go. So I think we have to accept the new reality, and we are a country that is trying to ascend to the European Union. We have examples from the neighborhood, seeing that when that happens, there is an exodus in a way. What we need to do in the future years is make sure that we are an attractive economy that attracts people who repatriate, however, also attracts people who are coming for the first time. Serbia is for the first time becoming a country of immigration. We have more than 76,000 foreigners living in Serbia legally as of last month, which this is a number that increased, I would say dramatically in the last 5 years, and even, very, very visibly as well last year since Ukraine and Russia conflict. So with all this in mind, I think it's best if, people who are well educated and right fit for the jobs and want to move out, you shouldn't stop them. You shouldn't try to attract them back if they are not willing. However, if they're inclining to come back, you need to provide them with full support, because often repatriation tends to be a bigger cultural shock than even slowly emigrating. So in that regard, we try to provide full support. Whether you want to stay connected with people who are in Serbia but want to stay abroad, or you want to come back, we kind of give you all the answers that you need. So I think hope that answers your question in a way.
Well, it does. It's a great start, and it's also a great bridge to Pavel, who is a university professor in Poland and has studied Polish emigration, also remigration. And Pavel, I remember when we basically looked at it together, you said, well, there's no, because Ivan just said, oh, if we join the EU, there's going to be exodus. Others have had that problem, that challenge. And you were very relaxed about this. And perhaps you can just tell us about the Polish experience, one, but then also this tension, or perhaps not even a tension, between integration, good integration in countries where people go to, and then perhaps inclinations to go back? Do we even know how many people circulate? It would be great to have your perspective on this.
Thank you, and so many issues here. So let me maybe start with a few comments on the slides, because that was why I raised my hand, and I'll just go to your questions. So just a few reflections on my side. So first of all, I would just I fully understand the idea just to look at the Western Balkans as just sort of a region entity, but I would just maybe make the point how tricky it can be, and I would just refer the post-2004 migration. And this is also not only our experience, but also experience of many other think tanks and also universities, organizations that, for example, if we just look at the region of Central Eastern Europe in total, it simply hinders so many important issues. So, for example, in the data we saw, it is an apparent difference between, for example, Albania and Kosovo and other countries in terms of scale, absolute and relative scale of migration, and possibly also in terms of patterns of migration. And why it's so important? Because we are interested in outcomes of migration, and it was quite fascinating in the case of post-2004 migration that there was just a striking difference between, for example, Poland that looked quite well in terms of migration outcomes, and, for example, Baltic states. And of course, this is understandable that we're just looking at the Western Balkans as a region, but still, I would definitely suggest to look into more detail on particular countries, because this is what really matters. The second point, what we saw, and that was really fascinating, the set of migration drivers. And I have to say that's just extremely complex set of migration drivers. And this is not a good news for all people who are working migration policies. Particularly, we have here just a combination of socio-economic and also political factors, including corruption, also political situation. And I would say that makes really tricky the story we are just trying to disentangle here. And this is also what Ivan said. Yeah. So as for me, return migration is mostly conditional on the very situation in the country of origin. And if you just look at this driver set, it makes the issue simply very, very complex. The next point is just somehow puzzling for me, the relatively low employment rates of people from region, the Western Balkans. And I would say that maybe this is due to a large share of family migrants from the region. So I don't know that much about the region. So maybe this is somehow could help us to understand the picture. But of course, as always, overqualification is an issue. However, as it has been said, in the case of Western Balkans, is bigger than usual, the average in the case of other OECD countries. And for me, what really matters here is just what is the explanation. So first of all, is it due to transferability of skills? It has been somehow suggested, but I'm not sure that this is the only case. The other would be, for example, the family migration pattern, as I suggested, and last but not least, migration projects. And I will just go back to this in a second. And last point on the slides is the question of remittances and the issue of developmental impacts of remittances. And this is what we are studying for decades in migration research. And of course, what we know, the transfer costs matter a lot, but what matters the most is just the context, it's just the structural conditions in the origin country. And this is hugely problematic. And this is what we experienced in Poland and in many other countries. We should not really expect massive developmental impacts of remittances because, people are leaving because, for example, of lack of, business opportunities in the country. So why we should expect that they would just invest their money coming from remittances? This is just, it doesn't make any sense. However, there is another part of the story. And this is the importance of remittances for particular individuals and also for particular households. And this is hugely important, because in remittances, they alleviate inequalities. And for many people, they're just part of survival strategies. So I guess on the one hand, of course, these are our expectations about how development can be relied on remittances. But on the other hand, please, we should remember that remittances really matter for households they are involved in migration. And now going maybe to your question, just for...
Or maybe we can, sorry, Pavel, to interrupt you, but because you had really good comments on the slides, perhaps we can put it aside for a moment, come back to it later, and we can have Lisa react first, and I'll definitely come back to you. And also, Lisa, there's already, because we were at remittances now, a question from the audience where Kansim Johnson asked whether there are known policy hindrances that make it more difficult to send remittances. Now, Pavel said we shouldn't look too much at for remittances helping development, but still, it would be nice perhaps to have your insights whether there would be. Is that why people are using informal channels, and what you see as possible policy levers? But please, Lisa, if you want to react a bit, that would be great.
Yes, thank you so much, Pavel, for all your remarks. That's really interesting. I'm sorry we had decided I would keep the presentation very short and move to the panel. So, but it's good to be able to also maybe say a few additional words on the in response to this on the presentations, because that was just scratching on the surface. So yeah, since Nicola, you started in the end of the remittances, yes, I think this is really important point in the report. We also make this comment that, I mean, remittances is private resources. It's sent from migrants to their families typically. So there should be, we should really respect this also, that this is not government money coming in. So it's more about making the options available for households. And we know that most of and this is what shows both in other contexts, but also from the research that has been done in the Western Balkans, that most of the remittances goes directly to private consumption and actually daily consumption. It's more to cover daily needs, etc. A bit less on the long-term investments, and maybe for a good reason. It's, like this, we should also think about households and individuals making the optimal decisions for them. What we know sometimes is that, yeah, if investment opportunities are not known or if they're limited, etc., there is scope to also help pointing towards what could be maybe a more productive use of remittances, or making those channels available. So that's more the point that we're trying to make in the report also. But ultimately, this is a decision for households and individuals that are receiving the remittances. I think we should also not, I mean, this is also a discussion that we see that because they are used more for consumption purposes, this is bad. Well, it's not necessarily bad if that's what if that's where the needs are. But it might also be that they can free up, even if we see that most of it is used for consumption, maybe that can also help free up some other resources that in the longer term can also allow investment. So yeah, just wanted to make that point also, that we are not ignoring these perspectives in the report. Also, we do bring that up to some extent. Yeah, also, I don't know, I can react a little bit as the family migration, like the reasons for migration and the type of migration is also obviously very important in the DIOC data, as you probably know. This is a stock data of several generations of immigration also here, and several decades of immigration, I should say, and sometimes also at least 2 generations. So there's a lot going on in that data, and what we do in the report is also look at more recent migrants versus those that have been there for longer, look at a bit which are naturalized, how many are naturalized, etc., to try to nuance a little bit the picture. But we are not always able to go that much into detail and breaking down the employment outcomes, for example, by each of those dimensions. And we look at also, we complement this data with data from Eurostat on the type of migration. So there also see the share of family migration, etc. But there's more to be done in this. I think this is very important also, and especially in the context of the Western Balkans, where there were different waves of migration over time. So yes, definitely agree that there's many layers here on this. And the push or the reasons why people are migrating, this is also very interesting. This is based on a survey. I think this was also maybe a question that came up there. It's based on a survey that we did online. So obviously there's not a representative sample. And we know that, for example, these tend to be more highly educated migrants that answered it. It's also a mix of those that left quite long time ago and those that left more recent times. So these reasons might vary over time as well. It was not sort of looking at one specific wave of migration or so. So it's, but for that reason, it's also quite natural that the reasons vary a lot. Maybe I should stop there, not to take too much time, but also I'm looking at the chat. I will follow up on some of the questions in the chat also throughout the panel.
Yes.
Please feel free to
yes, and
also.
I will, if you don't, I will give them to you, those that are directed at you. Yeah, but now, well, I want to go to the others too, but since I had asked you a couple of questions on the, and then I want to connect basically to Latvia on your perspective, Pavel, regarding the well, perhaps the question, well, you already said Western Balkan countries are different, but do countries in principle have to fear a wave of emigration when they join the EU? And well, is it bad for the country? Is it beneficial, or don't we really know? So your perspective on migration flows in crises, when there's EU accession, from the Polish experience, that would be great.
So first of all, I have to say that there are various positions on this issue here in Poland, and mine is, I would say, rather optimistic. So what I was always saying is just we should acknowledge people's agency and their choices. So for me, what was really important that in the case of post-accession migration, we observe a massive eruption of people activity, in fact, and migration was just a symptom of this activity. And of course, some of them, they were doing not that well in terms of labor market, but still, they've been active. So for me, that was really important. And the second point, when we just speak about trajectories or maybe migrants' paths, the Polish case shows how complex the issue is, and it really depends on so many factors. And quite often we purely don't have impact on those factors. And I will just give you one basic fact, and this is related to our discussion today. In 2008, there was just, in fact, the biggest and the only return policy implemented by Polish government, sort of return policy, because the program targeting all of Polish citizens staying abroad, in fact. So one of the parts of the story was that the Polish government acknowledged the agency of migrants and also their choices to be away. And this is also what Ivan said before. I guess it's absolutely important these days, just to say very clearly that we acknowledge people's choices. Yeah, and we also think that, you know, I'm always opposing those people who just treat immigrants as lost sort of population. They are definitely not lost. So they can be citizens of a country. They can be very active citizens these days, and they can be just all the time linked with the country. So it was 2008. There was just the initiative launched by the Polish government, and it was just targeting mostly people staying in the United Kingdom and Ireland. At the time, that was just the biggest portion of Polish diaspora. And we know already that this is the point of time with many migrants, 6-7 years after 2004, when people make their decision if they want to be more settled or rather return to a country of origin. But then the global financial and economic crisis happened. And the outcome of the crisis was very simple. Due to uncertainty, most of migrants, they simply decided to stay where they were at the moment. So in fact, we never observe massive return flow, maybe with just exception of people flowing from Ireland. So it simply shows how difficult these issues were. There was just quite interesting case because there was an initiative of Polish cities They've been arranging sort of events, mostly United Kingdom, and they're just trying to target Polish migrants, and they just wanted to attract them to come back to Poland. Out of 12 such events, only 2 have been completed. The rest simply reside because of the economic crisis. And it shows how complex the issue was. And then the story, when I started to talking with the case of the region, Western Balkans, and the case of particular countries. I would be happy to learn more about the experience of Baltic states, because the case of Poland is quite specific. And I tell you why. So of course, migration from Poland was quite massive, but in absolute terms, not in relative terms. If you look at the various estimates and also analysis, it shows that in fact, the impact of migration on, for example, Polish labor market was moderate or negligible. So in fact, it was far more important for Baltic states. So that's why I would really also suggest to look at particular countries and not as a region as a whole. So in fact, just to maybe sum up, in Poland, I would say migration of Poles was never treated as a really important political issue. It was never a subject of political debate, and maybe this is one of the reasons why we never had a substantial pro-return or policy targeting also Polish diaspora. And maybe I'll just go back to this later. It's quite important.
Great. Yeah, and you wanted to hear, Pavel, the Baltic experience. So we have Reinis here who can respond to that. But also what would interest me is your perspective on this, policies from sending countries to engage with the diaspora. Ivan already said, it's not only about return, it's also about, keeping the contact. Maybe you can establish business ties, and they can be active citizen, as Pavel said. Citizens, as Pavel said. I wanted to say. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that, and then perhaps even a second point. So Anita and Lisa got many questions about their observation. I think it's quite typical that immigrants often are not able in their destination countries to get jobs that match their skills. Whether that's something you can confirm for Latvia, and what that means for the policies you're setting up to when you're engaging with diaspora. If there's anything you try to do there, or do you think it's more the responsibility of destinations in many ways?
Yes, thank you very much for this discussion and for presentation. And actually, I will start with this second part of the question, because I exactly wanted to point out this when I saw it in the presentation, that people with tertiary education are working in less qualified jobs. That was one of the sentences in your presentation, if I understood it correctly. And that could be one of the challenges, right? That people are not using their skills properly, right? So that could be a challenge. And the other thing from the presentation, what I noticed, it was this great slide of the reasons of immigration. And it's interesting that sometimes we like to put it really narrowly, that it's only economic benefits, right? But interesting that the first reason was because of corruption or political instability in my home country, in my home economy. So, and actually there were 10 or 15 different reasons, right? So we actually see this issue of immigration as really, really complex issue. And this, what you mentioned, and also Lisa mentioned, that there are also different times of immigration, different waves, right? And similar, we have situation from case of Latvia, where we have a so-called experienced or old diaspora. After the Second World War, around 150,000 people stayed to live in diaspora, and they have kids and they have grandkids. And how do we keep those ties together with Latvia and a new diaspora, if we can say so, after joining EU, Schengen zone, and free labor force movement. And yes, we from Ministry of Foreign Affairs, from Society Integration Foundation, we have had different initiatives where we are trying to keep these ties. And to be honest, these past 2 or 3 years after the COVID, where many people now, or basically everybody uses Zoom or Teams meetings, we are becoming more closer, right? I have had several great conversations with our people in Australia or United States, and it's just so easy. Well, besides the time zone, right? But okay, let's arrange this meeting, and we are so close, right? Like we are as close as with you, right? But yes, we have different projects where we are supporting NGOs based in different continents, different countries, to strengthen our diaspora, to strengthen their communication channels. It can be cultural activities, it can be voting activities that they would, for example, last year we had parliament elections, so there were different diaspora NGO activities to promote voting, to promote participation. They invited politicians to discuss the topics that would be interesting for migrants and diaspora people, right? So different activities in approximately 15 or 20 countries in Europe and in other continents. So it's important how we keep those ties. Not only, well, some solution could be like even mentioned repatriation, and we have several really good examples where highly skilled people become, for example, recently one rector of one university of applied science in Ventspils came from Sweden. He was leading Space Technology Institute under the KTH Royal Institute, and now he's giving this great experience from the Sweden. He can give it to Latvia. So great positive impact of re-emigration. So, but yes, we are working a lot, and I can later on share some more examples. For example, camps where diaspora kids and local kids are meeting together and just keep their Latvian heritage and exchange of information, right? So it is important, but especially nowadays, I would say it has become a little bit easier because of online meetings, possibilities to learn Latvian language online in Zoom and different other platforms.
Yes, thank you very much, Reinis. That's a great perspective from the Baltics. And David, you're a researcher here in Germany, looking at well, various forms of migration, and I think also at how Germany attracts labor migration or tries to attract it. You also, I saw, look at circularity, but we can come back to that later, because I do have a question which I think would be good for you here from the chat from Susanne Bauer, who asked, to what extent do German-based SMEs already try to attract actively workers from Southeast Europe? Perhaps she said SE, and you know, is that an opportunity that companies are seizing? Is that something we observe? She also asked about racism hindering integration. I don't know whether you've looked into that, but I think at EIB you do many surveys, so I think in terms of looking at how people settle in, so maybe you have a few words to say about this, and happily also picking up on anything that struck you in the debate. You sent me a little message on remittances, so feel free to bring that up as well.
Okay, thank you very much for a question. So I will start with attracting skilled immigration and in general migration. Yes, Germany has an aging population in general, and we expect to have even higher labor shortages in future, even in very optimistic scenarios. So, and the West Balkan countries and Eastern European countries are a major donor pool of potential labor migrants. And there were a couple of recent policies and also older ones that I guess everyone knows. The West Balkan Regulation Act in 2016 that was recently also, I guess it's 2020, or prolonged for an indefinite period of time, which were proven to be quite successful, at least from the perspective of German society and German economy. So the integration is more or less without any big issues. I'm telling more or less because there are always issues. And of course, discrimination, especially discrimination against Muslim minorities, is a big issue everywhere, and Germany is not an exception in that case. But I wouldn't point it in a way that it's worse than in other places. It's doing quite well, but we find that it's quite important for integration, and especially economic integration, as the abundance of language courses. We all know that integration is quite highly correlated and actually caused by language integration. And there were recent studies in 2022 by my colleague Julia Kusekova and Herbert Brucher that found actually that language courses improve economic outcomes. There are also other kind of projects that increase the qualification of immigrants, especially for Western Balkan countries, once they are already in Germany. So they can apply for vocational training for 1.5 or 2 years, and to improve their qualifications and to improve their labor market outcomes. But here there are some major issues, because immigrants are around 7.2% of all applicants who apply for vocational training, but only around 4% of them are actually admitted. So we don't know exactly why it happens. And it's really popular among them. Around 50% of them prefers vocational training to low-skilled employment, which is natural. Why would people want to work in a minimum wage? So, but still, it opens up some future problems that we might potentially address in the long term. So regarding in general, attracting migrants, there are different programs, and now there is the Augmentation of Skilled Immigration Act that actually redefines what the skilled immigrant is, because we have previously we all had quite biased about tertiary education, which is really misleading, because there are skills that require tertiary education but are not applicable in the destination countries. Like, I mean, I will make a ridiculous example of being an expert in Mao Zedong's economic policy, even a PhD degree is not giving you any success in the labor market. So in terms of this, there is a redefinition and more emphasis on experience, working experience, especially for IT sector, those working in IT sector, but also to other people. So degree qualification requirements are becoming easier, though there are still major problems. And I think that also relates to a couple of questions that appeared in the chat of why are people actually misqualified? I think that's a complex question. And one of them is, of course, obviously the recognition of degrees and qualifications. The other one is the equivalence of degrees, because education systems differ across countries, and skills that are defined by them and the trust that the firms or institutions are going to put on a given skill or education label are different. So there is a misunderstanding of what is skilled and what is education across destination and home countries. Also, not less important is the abundance of middle skilled position in Germany in the labor force and relatively high returns. So if someone just to mention a small number, that only 1 out of 4 people who comes to Germany actually stays in Germany. So there is significant return and forward migration, which is a good news for many origin countries and not that good news for Germany. And there are active measures to retain immigrants, especially high-skilled immigrants in the country, so which might go at odds with most of the things I guess we are going to discuss. Did I miss something? Oh, yes, about the remittances. So my own point. So I will slightly disagree with Pavel's point that remittances are first of all important for those who are receiving the remittances. Yes, of course, the effect is going to be much larger for those who receive the remittances, but we shouldn't neglect the local labor economic effects due to increased spending, an average increase of education peer effects, and other factors. So in fact, there is a recent, not so recent already, study from the Philippines that suggests that we all are actually underestimating the effects of remittances, at least for the development impact. So I think that's something that's worth to be mentioned. And I'm not aware of any evidence from the West Balkan countries or Eastern European countries in general. And last but not least, the fact that origin countries are sending low-skilled migrants predominantly, or middle-skilled migrants, or less high-skilled migrants, is not necessarily a good news, because when high-skilled people migrate, they increase the pressure for acquiring skills in their origin countries. So opening a door for beneficial brain drain or brain gain in general, while low-skilled migration is not good, both from the perspective of destination countries and in general for the perspective of origin countries. So I think adjusting the origin countries' education system in terms of quality and also the potential to supply the demand of these people is gonna be a key to success in the future. Thank you very much. So.
Thanks, David. And you had a very calm voice, but now you heated. I think you're up for heating the debate because both Reinis and Pavel's hands went up. And I'm going to ask Reinis to react first, and then Pavel.
Yes,
and I want
actually,
and I have a question for Ivan after that.
I liked this, what David mentioned, this, well, often we call this pessimistic view when we discuss about immigration as brain drain, right? But I like what you said, this brain gain, and this will be also a little bit reply to Pavel, where he mentions that yes, it influenced, especially after year 2004, immigration influenced Baltic states by significant numbers. But well, we can still discuss if it was brain drain or brain gain, because, for example, from my own perspective, I was able to move to Finland after 2004 and studied there in Finland, right? I was able to study Swedish language and work later on for Swedish company, but benefited for Latvia, right? I remember when I used to work for Ministry of Education and Science, we had great team where one director graduated from Oxford, other director graduated from London School of Economics, and they took their PhDs in Georgia Tech University in the United States. So of course, this opening up border from the first perspective, you can say, yeah, it's just labor migration, right? But from the other perspective, we see a lot of good examples where people were able to really see how the education is doing in other countries, how the business is doing in other countries, how the inclusion of society is in other countries, right? How David said that you can then later on maybe move this practice, and that we really see that maybe our countries need this exchange of experience, right, from different countries. And we see several new cases, how I said, especially after COVID time, or for example, we had a big diaspora population in Great Britain or Ireland, and after Brexit, a lot of people moved back to, or at least considered moving back to Latvia. And we had future business owners. Maybe they have picked up some good idea and decide to have a business in Latvia. And we have had, and actually now municipality of Riga will introduce again different grants, different funding schemes for diaspora if you want to launch your new SME, your business, right? So it's sometimes we can look from pessimistic perspective, but sometimes I really see that this exchange of brain, exchange of experience really can benefit your own local country.
Thanks a lot, Reinis, for that perspective. And I think you probably agree mostly, Pavel, right? And you had your own reactions, perhaps to something else.
Yeah, I fully agree. I just want to clarify the issue of remittances, as always, fascinating and hot debate here. I'm not saying that that developmental impacts of remittances are not important. I'm not saying that we should not try to somehow influence those impacts. Just the opposite. There is we know a lot about how remittances work. We know a lot what kind of instruments we can use, for example, to nudge people a little. We know a lot about, I don't know, microfinancing structures, how to streamline remittances into savings and this kind of stuff, particularly from Latin America. There is just plenty of studies, and I guess we should do much more in Europe just to incentivize people in various ways. What I wanted to say is something different, that we should not be over optimistic and we should not overestimate the structural role of remittances. And this is exactly because of structural conditions. And just to maybe exemplify it in another way, there was just a large number of studies, not on financial remittances, but on social remittances. So what has been studies, what the question, if return migrants can act as agents of change upon their return. And the outcomes of the study are quite similar. This is very rarely the case. Why? Because, you know, it's not very realistic to assume that those people will behave, for example, in Poland, exactly as it was the case in United Kingdom and Germany, because simply the context is different. So in the case of remittances is quite similar. And what I said, that has been also echoed in the case of many speakers here. What really matters is just the overall economic, social, and institutional situation in the country of origin. If the situation improves, it also creates much better area also for developmental impacts of remittances, also of social remittances.
Thanks a lot, Pavel, for that perspective. And Ivan, well, I'm not sure whether because you're more in practical politics in many ways, and perhaps others can react too, but I was just wondering, because without having studied this is more casual observation, also for preparing this this webinar. So what I observe is that some from diasporas, if you will, from some countries are very well organized, and for example, this is the case in my childhood, at least for people coming from then Yugoslavia. I remember they organized school at weekends, which other immigration groups didn't. And for example, the Poles, I have the impression, but I may be wrong, that they don't organize strongly. They just spread out, they integrate well, I have to say. But it's not that they have these strong diaspora communities where they even teach in Polish, etc. So my question to you here is, how important is it, or does it help you when the diaspora already organize? And I think the Latvian diaspora organizes well. They, you know, culture, dances, and all those things. So do you have an idea what drives strong networks, diaspora organizations, and how important is it to basically use this to make the tie between you, Serbia, and the destination countries?
It's a very complex question, and it has different answers depending on different layers of diaspora, because, you know, everybody who works in this field knows that diaspora is like an onion. What is a diaspora? Is it citizen? Is it passport holders? Is it, you know, second, third, eighth generation? How do you discern? So we have a long tradition of emigrating to Germany and Austria and Switzerland. And, you know, it's very strange. Some of these cycles have developed. You have villages in especially Eastern Serbia, which is particularly empty, where there's a cycle of when somebody gets born, turns 18, goes to Germany, works all of their life, comes back at 60, and then like the cycle continues. You know, it's just like for 3 or 4 generations, they go to the same destination, to the same city. It's just like a link in that regard. It's a very strange concept. I would say that this well-organized part, it's only from my perspective, it's really like only up to an extent. We have only organized in the level of cultural societies, a little bit of the language, a little bit with the dance, and a little bit, you know, like football and cevapi, and that's about it, you know, like, and whenever it grows a bit more from like a professional stance that you're organizing as a community to make something an impactful change, whether it is in the community or it's connecting back to the origin country, that we really have only a handful of organizations that are doing this on you know, well, you know, cultural aspiration and you know, connecting like Serbian entrepreneurs. They're great. 600 entrepreneurs from all over the world that are Serbian, that are connecting each like last Thursday in a month, pitching ideas, investing in each other, investing in Serbia. These are the great examples. But the vast majority is either language and like, let's, meet up for some little bit of cultural event. And that is, I think, that is both a limiting factor in further integration, because the ones who are not really connected to those society tend to be more successful in the destination countries, because they're, I would say, not as held back by the constraints of the local narrative. I want to come back to like some of the things that were mentioned before. So about we do, and I will kind of jump from what Pavel has said and what Enis has said, and like kind of like and David has said, but it's kind of remarking to a bit of what everybody was talking about. So we know for a fact that like 4 out of 5 Serbians that leave the country come back to the country, which is talking about that kind of repatriation. But then, some of them do come after a year or 2 years of studying, and we do know that 50% of students do come back at one point as well who study abroad, which is a great number. And we do not have a problem with brain drain as much as we used to. We are actually now struggling much more in this qualified, but like mid-educated, but a highly qualified labor force. Carpenters, welders, just handymen, people who are crafty, who know how things work, drivers. This is where we're struggling now. We have had actually the Vienna Institute for Economic Development noted that we had an influx of 90,000 highly qualified people net positive from 2015 to 2019. So because we're also attracting a little bit, this is not only repatriation, this is coming from all the Western Balkan region. We are an attractive economy for people in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro, Macedonia, and other countries, because we are in that regard a little bit bigger, and then the gravitational force pulls them in a little bit more. And regarding remittances as well, like we are in a tough position. 70% goes to direct consumption, 27% goes into real estate purchase, and only 3% in investment. Now there's like, to give a little glimmer of hope, I would say there is a project that we're working on. It's just going to be a pilot project for this first initial phase. But maybe it can provide an inspiration to some of you that are listening, and some of you that are in the field. We're the United Nations Development Project here in Serbia. We're trying to develop this program where basically, using some of the more modern technologies, you can kind of invest a smaller amount. And I will give you a plastic example. I'm not saying it's going to be like that, but like it's going to put a picture of what we're looking to do. Let's say a small town size, because we're also dealing with depopulation and high urbanization as well. So let's say a small town, which is the last defense for depopulation, is they don't have a facility that they need. Let's say it's a town, Leskovac, and they need a community pool. Like they don't have, let's say they don't have a pool. So the diaspora then invests through basically, this is like a kind of a crappy like catchphrase, but like, through like the tokens, digital tokens, but like basically invest in developing a project. And then the dividends from this commercially viable project goes directly to the recipients of the remittances, so that money that comes in kind of gets flushed in and already like invested into something, and then the dividends get dispersed to the end recipients, who would in the end would be the recipients anyways. So we're now working on a model how to develop that, and it's going to be like an initial phase. But thinking like that, using technology in a more positive way, like and you making use of that money before it gets into the hands of the ones who need it the most, maybe a development, having a development aspect. So I just wanted to kind of touch on those things, and yeah, hope to continue on the discussion. I hope that I answered your question again, even though I jumped through a little bit of a slalom through the speaker's comments.
Well, that's great. That's what a discussion is all about, right? I mean, we have already talked quite a bit about skills now, but I wanted to give you the chance, Anita, because there was a question directed directly at you, whether, well, again, this question about skills. Why is there a mismatch if receiving countries also lack skilled labor? And David did comment on that a little bit. It's also a recognition of qualifications, etc., or a mix-up of education and skills sometimes. But and then the question, where do the highly skilled people from that region work? Is that something that came out of your study? Or Lisa can also comment, but I just didn't want to ignore the question that was specifically directed at you.
Well, actually, I was quite actively answering directly to the questions raised to me. No, but basically a couple of observations. We didn't go into a lot of details and on those to be perfectly honest with you, but the issue with mismatch and of qualification, one of the actually within the countries of origin that was raised, does it pose a problem to companies? I mean, one of the issues is certainly, I mean, also looking just simply at the size of the economies of the Western Balkans. They are small countries, so the labor base as such is already rather limited. So the effect of immigration is felt there much more than in a big country as compared to. And of course, there's also an ongoing kind of a chronicle issue in the Western Balkans of skills mismatches, so the outcomes of the educational system and what actually is needed on the labor market, what companies demand from, what kind of skills they demand from the students that enter the labor markets is fairly different. Also, the types of investments that are coming in, because if already a big investments comes in, so in certain types, and a number of certain types of skills are needed at the moment in time. So that is also a bit more difficult than to match this kind of demand from, for example, from foreign investor. The question also a bit of overqualifications compared maybe to the rest of the in the destination countries, why the Balkans are not performing as good as the rest, and maybe Lisa also has some experiences from the other work doing in the migration department. But certainly one of the elements here we need to take into consideration, you know, because we can't really compare now here, you know, the Poland or the Baltics, because they're already part of the EU. You know, the qualifications are rather recognized, you know, when coming to Germany or some other Western European countries, is rather to be accepted than coming from a non-EU country. So we have to distinguish here a little bit the EU versus the non-EU context, which sort of by default makes them, you know, more on paper more qualified, but not being able to actually perform the job that they have been educated for. So yeah, these are just a couple of reflections from my side. I don't know if Lisa also wants to.
Great. Yeah, Lisa, you did answer a bit in the chat, but perhaps you want to just briefly pick up on that.
Yeah, in parallel as you asked a question, I was posting something on the chat, but it was becoming quite long, so maybe it's easy to just say a few words, a few sentences on this. So yeah, what I put there was that so we haven't really, I mean, it's a very good question. Why do we see this pattern, and why? I mean, as we pointed out, this is not unique to the Western Balkan, but it seems to be an issue that is extra pronounced for immigrant groups from the Western Balkan. Not all of them, like I mentioned Serbia, and I think it's also North Macedonian immigrants that has a similar pattern to the other. To the average immigrant population in the OECD, but it's certain immigrant group from the Western Balkans that are struggling a lot and showing much higher overqualification rates, and certainly we would love to have analyzed this more in depth. We didn't, and someone pointed out also asking about where are these people working and that are overqualified. That's something that we could do, and we have it. We have that statistics. We didn't include it in the report because of space issues. Actually, we had so many things that we were already discussing. But this is about as far as we can go in from the data that we have. We cannot, for example, we can know which level of education the people have to establish that they're overqualified compared to what occupations they're working. But we don't know, for example, in which occupations they were trained originally, so that could have been interesting to match, to see, go a little bit further into this. But in general, of qualification, of course, we do quite some work on this also in our unit, but it's difficult to break down exactly what's driving here, but David was already pointing to some of these areas also. Can be a problem of transferability of skills, both in terms of, because you're not speaking the language, you cannot perform the skills that you're doing in the country of origin, at least not in the short run. Then over time you might learn the language and be able to take up a job that better matches. Also, of course, transferability of your certificates or diplomas, etc., needs to be done. It could also be more perceptions from the employers, or taking into account experience in the labor market from your country of origin or other countries as well that are not sort of, it's much more difficult to have these accounted for in the country of destination. Could also be simply also a combination with the demand side in the country of destination. Germany, which is a big destination country here, has a huge need for mid-skilled workers now. It's easy to find, it's maybe easier to find a job, and that pays relatively well. So maybe you're also, accepting this. Discrimination, this is another topic that we have recently started working on in our unit, also more systematically, but that's also quite difficult to capture in the data that we have, but certainly that might also play a role here. So many factors. I think there was someone that also pointed out that we say that employers in the country of origin is struggling to find the people with the right skills, but then there's also skills mismatch on the destination side. So where are these people working? But I think from the Western Balkan perspective, the employers there, it's not just we're not just talking about the skilled population here or the highly skilled in that sense for the employers in the Western Balkans. Sometimes in the interviews we did, they were also pointing out that they're lacking more low skilled also, but not people doesn't have the right skills to match the jobs that they're, so this can happen at all skills levels also. It's not just saying that they're looking for the highly skilled, but there could be skills mismatches at another end because people are just not trained in those occupations or sectors that are most in need of labor. So those were some of the inputs I had for this, but certainly I would be interested in looking more into what we could do on exploring more the qualification rates here, because that's an interesting question, explaining a bit more background to this.
That's great. And Reiners, you had a reaction.
Yes, I think Lisa also in chat and Lisa and Anita both explained it pretty well, but we see some good examples where education is recognized, and how Estonian doctors are working in Finland, or I know some Latvian experts or doctors are working successfully in Germany. But obviously, how Lisa explained in the chat, that there are some language or first years adapting issues. For example, if you are a teacher in preschool or school, and you are immigrating from Latvia or Poland or from Balkans to Germany or Sweden, you can just open a door and say, hey, I'm still studying German or Swedish language. I'm still trying to pick it up, but I would like to be a teacher here in school, right? First, you need to have some local knowledges, at least for the language perspective, right? And you, Nicola, you mentioned, yes, we have, long traditions from language introduction, language integration, culture, song and dance festival. We have this summer a huge event where people will come from all over the world. But yes, we are working more and more on different initiatives on different perspectives. For example, now this summer we will have World Latvians Economic Forum in economic and innovations, right? And that is just the initiative from the past 10 years. So it's again different initiatives, where we can understand where are our researchers, our scientists, our Latvian Thais who are working in higher education, in business field, in economic and innovations, and how we can help each other. Both promoting export from Latvia and just to have intellectual cooperation. So we have several traditional ways. How do we have these ties together, and how do we network, and how do we keep our traditions. But several new initiatives, ideas definitely have risen and will come in the future as well.
Great, and we are thank you, Rainis, and we're almost our time is over, but I do want to pick up on two little aspects. So one is what Rainis just mentioned, the language courses. And before we started the webinar, Pavel, you were saying, well, you want to discuss what integration is, and I suppose it's also a bit about the responsibility of destination countries. And I wanted to ask you whether you want to comment on this. And then I have a mini question for David, and then unfortunately we'll have to close because this has been really instructive. Pavel.
Yes, I'm not sure if it's a good question for the end of our meeting because it's quite complex, but I will just maybe I will make a try, and then we'll see. Because the story is that in fact in the migration literature there is ongoing debate on in fact what integration means, how it should be understood. And as for me, this is still unresolved issue and quite controversial. So first of all, there is no common understanding what integration is. They are ontological semantic controversies. There are quite important differences between, for example, the American scholarship and European scholarship, for example, what we understand as economic integration. So I would just present to you what's my take on this, and maybe one important point to consider for discussions like we have today. Fascinating discussion, by the way. So first of all, what do we know for sure? That there are various layers or dimensions of integration. And I would maybe mention three of them. The first one, just structural, relational, and cultural or identity related integration. And this is quite important because, we should acknowledge that not all of migrants, they want or need to be integrated on all three levels. What is particularly important, for example, in the European context, is just the structural integration, meaning to be integrated into the institutions of receiving country in terms of labor market, education, health system, welfare system, whatsoever. Yeah, so that's the first point. And the second point, and this is just outcome of our studies on both Polish migrants, but also Ukrainian migrants in Poland. What really matters is just there are also aspirations and capabilities of migrants and their migration projects. Because the story is that, not all of the migrants really, they want and need to be integrated. And this is particularly the case of temporary migrants. And it was also visible in the case of our discussion. If you're just temporary migrant only, what do you need? You just need to be part of the labor market. However, it's not always necessary for you to be employed according to your skills. That was one of the puzzling issues in our studies on the brain drain gain of Polish migrants abroad. In the case of many of them, they accepted jobs below their skills because they wanted just to earn some money as quickly as possible and return to the country of origin. And the case of migration projects is super important for me because first of all, they can just evaluate, they just evolve over time, they can change, and absolutely they impact both migration policy, integration policies, and just the situation of particular migrants. And just maybe to finish here, because this is not only relevant to our discussion on, for example, Western Balkans, but this is hugely relevant, for example, for the situation of war refugees from Ukraine. These days, we quite common speak about integration, but from my point of view, maybe we should rather refer to reception practices, or how to discuss, in fact, the situation of those people. 50% of them, they declare that they want to stay in Poland temporarily only, and they just want to be back to Ukrainians as soon as possible. And the question is how we should proceed with various integration measures. For example, in the case of integration in the schooling system. This is not for today's debate, but as for me, it's really, really important just to acknowledge the various layers of integration and also the importance of migration projects. As for me, they really matter.
Thanks, Pavel. And this is, opening up a whole set of questions that we cannot debate to the end, and we are over our time. But just because I think it fits, if you can just give us, David, I saw that you look into circular, so migration projects can differ very much. You can be a refugee, you know, Ukraine, but also sometimes people come and go, seasonal workers, etc. And I think you've looked into the, you know, what happens to the well-being of children of workers who come and go, and well, don't go into detail, but just perhaps from that perspective and from that kind of work, can you confirm a little what Pavel said, that it's very important to look into what kind of migration is there, and perhaps for integration, how important is it that families can come when people stay for longer, if this is not a temporary project?
Thanks. I think the question is really complex. So it depends what type of temporary work they are doing, who is actually going for the temporary work, why they are doing that. In some countries, temporary work, for example, is a solution to finance education. So usually I know for the example of Armenia, where you see a spike of parents going to temporary work just during like 1 year prior the university admission period of their kids. So in some cases that can be really beneficial. In other cases that becomes a lifestyle, like missing parent forever or cyclically. And then circular migrations or temporary migration can even become a road to permanent migration just for low skilled or medium skilled. So it's not really clear cut. And then it also implies structural changes in family. So who is making the decision? And in highly patriarchal societies, this is going to be different from not that patriarchal societies. Like, for example, there was evidence from Mexico that when father is away, mother spends more on woman's education. And in other societies, the father of the father, the grandfather, takes the responsibilities. I think that was the case, I guess, if I'm not mistaken, from Bangladesh, migration from Bangladesh. And also there is this remitting not only income, but also social norms. Sometimes it happens and it's not always necessarily positive. So it induces political changes and other things. In short, the consensus more or less is that the positive effects dominate the potential negative effects, but this might be just the issue of us not being able to identify the negative effects rather than the positive effects dominating. So
okay, that's a complex answer to a complex question. I'm sorry I went even longer than we had, but it was so fascinating. I think that was, at least for me, a very fruitful debate. Thanks, Lisa and Anita, for giving us the input. And then Pavel, Rainis, Ivan, and David for giving us all these different perspectives across the entire region. I learned a lot. Also, thanks to the audience for coming into the debate. And I realize I'm standing between you and your lunch. So I wish you a very nice afternoon. Thanks for coming and debating with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.